The first sound was metal cracking, a hammer against a deadbolt. 4 days after my husband's funeral, and I was standing 6 feet from my own front door watching my father-in-law take a swing at the only lock between me and a man who thought grief had made me small. Welcome to Storyland family drama, where the quiet ones are never as helpless as they look, and where today's story is going to prove that in ways you won't see coming. My name is Renee Calloway. 11 days ago, my husband Owen was laughing about burnt toast at the breakfast table. 14 hours later, he was gone. A heart attack, the doctor said, the kind that gives no warning and takes no apologies. Owen was 46. We had been married 19 years, and in all that time, he was the only person in his family who never once made me feel like an outsider standing at the edge of a room that wasn't mine. His father, Walter Calloway, felt differently. Walter had decided who I was the day we met, a plain, soft-spoken woman who kept to herself, who wore secondhand cardigans instead of designer labels, who would fold the moment life pushed back. He liked women who filled a room with noise and certainty. I filled rooms with silence instead, and Walter mistook that silence for emptiness. What Walter never knew was that I had spent 18 years as a field intelligence analyst, first for the Army, and later on contract work I was never permitted to describe at dinner parties. I had learned to read danger in a room before anyone else noticed it was there. I had learned the difference between a real threat and a man performing one. When I left that life behind, I buried it so completely that even Owen only knew the outline that I'd served, that some years were classified, that I sometimes checked the windows before making coffee. I never wanted that world following me home. I wanted an ordinary one instead, and Owen had given me exactly that. 4 days after the funeral, I was at the kitchen table sorting through medical bills when a truck stopped outside. Walter climbed out first. His son, my brother-in-law, Grant, climbed out after him. I stood. I said his name. He didn't answer. He swung. The lock gave on the third hit. Walter stepped through my broken doorway like he already owned the deed. "You have 5 minutes," he said, "to get out of my son's house." I didn't move. Grant kept the phone pointed at me. "Just cooperate, Renee," he said quietly, like he was the reasonable one in a room he'd helped break into. "You broke into my home," I said. "This is family property now," Walter snapped. "My son is dead. Everything he owned belongs to his family. I was his wife, past tense," Walter said. Something in me went very still, not frightened. "We're looking for the deed," he said. "Insurance papers, bank records, anything related to the estate." "You don't have permission to search my home," he laughed. "You think you can stop me?" "Yes," I said, and for half a second, just half a second, something in his expression flickered before he recovered it. I glanced at the clock. 2:11 in the afternoon. "Fine," I said. "Take whatever you think belongs to you." Grant looked startled by how easily I gave in. Walter looked triumphant. Neither of them noticed I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was looking past them, out the front window, at the street. At 2:18, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in his 60s stepped out, looked at the broken door, looked at me, and his whole face changed. "Renee," he said, "are you ready?" I nodded. Walter's smile disappeared. "Ready for what? Who is this man?" I finally looked at him directly. "Someone who's about to tell you exactly what kind of door you just broke." The man's name was Marcus Vale. To Walter, a stranger. To me, one of the last people alive who'd known the woman I was before I became Owen's wife. Marcus didn't step inside. He simply stood at the threshold and said, "You need to leave. Breaking into a widow's home with a hammer isn't a family matter. It's a legal one." Walter backed toward the truck, but not before leaning close enough to whisper, "You'll regret humiliating me." "You did that yourself," I said. They left. I stood in my broken doorway and finally let myself breathe. That night, Marcus helped me change every lock in the house. And the next morning I drove to see Owen's attorney, a sharp, careful woman named Denise Marsh. She placed a thick folder on her desk. "This is what Owen left behind," she said. "Evidence that he knew his father was coming for this house." My chest went cold. Inside were bank statements, property filings, and a note in Owen's handwriting, underlined twice, "Dad cannot be trusted." Denise explained the rest. Walter had been quietly draining nearly $300,000 from an account tied to his late wife's estate. Money meant to be split between Owen and Grant, funneled instead into Walter's own property company. Owen had discovered it, hired Denise, and started building a case without ever telling me. Because that was Owen, he carried heavy things alone so I wouldn't have to. There was more. An amendment to the property agreement, one Walter didn't know existed, stating Owen's share of the house could never be transferred without my written consent. Walter didn't own anything. He never had. He was desperate because he knew that too. And there was an envelope with my name on it, written 3 weeks before Owen died, to be opened only if Walter made a move. Inside, a single note. "If you're reading this, Dad finally did what I feared. Don't fight him with anger, trust yourself. You know more about surviving hard things than you think. I didn't fight Walter with anger. I let him believe I was still the woman he'd decided I was: soft, cooperative, easy to push. I gathered every document Denise had. I confronted Grant, who admitted, quietly and ashamed, that Walter had promised him the family business in exchange for pressuring Owen to sign the house over. I recorded nothing, threatened no one. I simply waited for the moment Walter believed he'd already won. That moment came a week later, when Walter arrived with his attorney, certain he'd found a way to force a settlement. I handed his lawyer one folder: bank transfers, the real amendment, Grant's admission, and Owen's letter. His attorney read 3 pages and looked up, pale. Walter, we need to stop. This claim has no legal basis. Walter turned on Grant. You knew about this? I finally stopped lying for you, Grant said. For the first time, Walter looked old, not frightening, just an aging man who had mistaken control for love for so long he could no longer tell the difference. He looked at me and asked, almost quietly, "Who are you?" "Someone you should have gotten to know," I said, "before you decided I was weak." The legal fallout took months to settle fully. The estate funds were returned, the property claim collapsed, and Walter surrendered control of the accounts he'd manipulated. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, just paperwork, consequences, and long, uncomfortable silences. Grant came to see me on the porch one afternoon, exhausted and hollow. "I keep thinking about that day," he said. "I should have stopped him." "You should have." I agreed. "I was scared of him." "I know, but fear explains a choice. It doesn't erase it." He nodded, eyes wet. "Owen would hate what we became. He'd hate what happened," I said, "but I don't think he'd want either of us to stay broken over it." Weeks later, Walter came to my door alone, without a hammer this time, and stood there for a long moment before knocking. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Yes," I said, "you do. I was wrong about you. That wasn't your biggest mistake," I told him. "You thought love gave you ownership. You thought because I was quiet, I was someone you could push aside." He looked toward the driveway, his voice breaking slightly. "After my wife died, I felt like I was losing everyone. I tried to hold on tighter. Months later, my daughter asked me why I'd never told her about my years in the service. Because I wanted you to know me," I said, "before you knew my history." She asked if I'd ever been scared. "Everyone gets scared," I told her. "What makes someone strong isn't the absence of fear. It's staying calm enough to make the right decision anyway." The new lock on my front door still holds. I touch it sometimes on my way out, and I think about how a boundary isn't a wall built from anger. It's a door you control, and deciding who gets to walk through it is sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do. If this story moved you, like this video, tell me in the comments.